record on. Oh no, that's a first. Anyways, hello everyone. It's Alex Ward here on our bi-weekly education moment series. I go bi-weekly, but we seem to be having them on a weekly basis now, which is fantastic. Today we are joined by Damien of Henning Byrne LLP. Damien is our, not in-house lawyer, but he does rent some office space within our brokerage out of our Edmonton office, but he does service our Lethbridge, Sherwood Park, Devon, Tofield, and Edmonton locations, and Calgary. Can work across Alberta, no problem, and has done files across Alberta while still being based out of Edmonton. So thank you so much, Damien, for joining us today. Damien is going to be talking to us about a very important topic for you guys, RPRs and title insurance. So I know I get questions about this all the time. Damien is the true expert, so I am happy I'm recording this one because the last one I forgot to record, but this one will be shared and then we'll always be able to use as a resource. So Damien, the floor is yours.
All right. All right, you got that, Alex? Can you see this?
Yeah.
As Alex said, my name is Damien Meardi. I am a partner at Henning Byrne. I have been practicing there for about 8 years now. My professional background, I started out after law school as a small business development consultant. Primarily working, drafting business plans and grant applications for various industries. From there, I moved to the federal government, where I worked as a real property and portfolio analyst with Public Works and Government Services Canada. And my role there was to assist project teams by providing market analysis and strategic direction. After about 5 years of that, I realized that the public service was not for me and left to practice law. I articled with my current firm, was hired as an associate, and after 3 years became partner. So before we get going, I'd like to talk a bit about my process with the real estate file. My process can be summed up really as 2 words, and that's communication and service. I pride myself on being someone you and your clients can reach when they have a question, and I strive to make the experience as pleasant and pain-free as possible. So I do this in 6 ways. First and foremost, your client deals with me. I make it my practice to be the point of contact for you and your client, and you should never have to go through a gatekeeper just to have a quick chat, and that's pretty much what I do. Second, I will contact your client within a day or 2 to introduce myself. In my experience, this gives the client a level of comfort that things are moving forward. This is especially true with first-time home buyers who may be a little unsure of the process or anxious about what's going to happen next. After I contact them, I usually send a follow-up email, and that kind of restates the process and provides some helpful tips. I also CC the agent on the email, so the agent knows that this is moving forward and everything's fine. The fourth thing I do is I return calls as soon as I receive a message. I'm a big believer in the philosophy that service should be a big part of a service industry. So your client should never have trouble getting a hold of their service provider. And I will meet clients that execute documents at a place and time that is convenient for them. So this is especially helpful if your clients are a young family or the elderly. Your client should not have to take time off work or haul their children into a lawyer's office when everything can just as easily be completed in the comfort of their own home. And then finally, on possession day, you and your client will hear from me as soon as the deal is closed. So what this means for a purchase is that you receive an email from me as soon as the mortgage is funded and money is on the way to the seller. I find this helps remove the anxiety for the client as to whether the deal is going to close. But it also helps the agent plan their day because they have a better idea as to when keys will be released. On a sale, this means that you'll receive a text from me as soon as the deal is closed, and I'll have my report and check ready for the client by about noon. So today we're going to talk a bit about real property reports. This is the subject I tend to get the most questions on, and it is one where proper information during the contract process can be beneficial to both you and your client. While I'll be touching on some contractual issues, as you know, ultimately the market and your client's needs will decide what clauses you are able to insert into the contract. So we're going to be talking about what happens if there is no RPR, some differences between title insurance and the RPR, how the age matters, some differences between compliance and non-conforming, some potential issues with sheds, decks, and fences, and then how the removal of a structure would affect an RPR. So first, what if there is no RPR? The buyer here has a couple of options. First, they can choose to delay possession until an RPR is provided. In this case, the seller can't charge interest and may be liable for any cost related to the delay. In my experience, this very rarely happens because buyers generally want to or have to move in as soon as possible. So the second thing we can do is negotiate a holdback. This is the most common method of dealing with the issue. Essentially what we're doing is negotiating an amount that will be held back from the seller until they can fulfill their obligations. So if I'm acting for the buyer, my philosophy for a holdback amount is that I would like the holdback amount to be large enough to cover the cost of whatever we're replacing. So for instance, if there's a problem with the deck missing from the RPR or no permits for a deck on an RPR, I would ask that the holdback be big enough to cover the cost of replacing that deck. And the second thing I'd like to know or like to ensure with the holdback amount is that it's large enough to compel the seller to complete what they're supposed to. So if it's too small, it might be worth it for a seller just to walk away and not do or complete the item that has to be completed. Where this information helps an agent is you can add holdback amounts to the contract. So if you're acting for a seller and they don't have an RPR, you can add a clause that the buyer will take possession on the possession day and that the seller's solicitor will hold back a certain amount until the RPR is provided. This may allow you to negotiate a smaller holdback than I can and ensure that the property closes when it's supposed to. If you're acting for a buyer, it's possible that you can negotiate a higher holdback than I may be able to. So this is kind of when Alex talked to me, the original discussion we had was title insurance was a big question. So this is kind of a bit of information about title insurance. I expect that most of you have heard many presentations from title insurance providers, and they know a lot more about their product than I do. There's not much I can add there, but I will say this. From mine and the lender's perspective, it does not matter whether a buyer has a compliant RPR or title insurance. They are both the same. They both get the job done as far as we're concerned. Where title insurance does have a bit of an advantage is when there have been renovations inside the house. So one of the things title insurance can do that an RPR cannot is cover the cost to get these items up to code if the seller did not obtain proper permits. The catch with title insurance is that it will only cover the lender for known defects, but it will not cover the client. So if there's a compliance report from the city indicating a problem and the seller offers title insurance in lieu of an RPR, that won't do much good for your client when it comes to that particular problem. The second risk with accepting, say, title insurance in lieu of is, well, it doesn't matter to the lawyer or the lender whether or not a property is title insurance or an RPR. It may matter to subsequent purchasers. So title insurance is getting a lot more popular. I used to see it maybe 2 out of every 10 deals, and now it's up around 5 or 6 out of every 10. But it's still, it's still kind of not taken over for RPRs. So if your client accepts a title insurance in lieu, any issues or improvements that would have been the current seller's problem may become your client's problem in the future. Which, again, if it's a big issue, could be a kind of a pain when you're going to sell the place. Age. So as far as we're concerned with the Law Society, age of the RPR is completely irrelevant. The only thing that matters to us is that it is completed properly and that it shows the current state of improvements. So if you are acting for a seller and they have an RPR that reflects the current state of improvements that's 20 years old, it's fine. There's no need to order a new one. However, lenders may feel differently. So if you are acting for a buyer, their lender may require an RPR of a certain age. In these cases, it might be a good idea to consider adding a clause in the contract requiring either a newer RPR or the old one along with title insurance. So compliance versus non-conforming. So the standard RECA contract allows for a seller to provide an RPR that is either compliant or non-conforming. So compliance just means everything's perfect, it's up to the current standards, no problems. Non-conforming is when everything was up to standard when it was built. It's just as good as far as our purposes for the sale. You don't have to get a new document, but the structures are no longer, if you were to apply today's standards to them, are no longer compliant. So they're okay in their present form. The problem is any alterations may change that and require that the structure be compliant. So where it affects you is if you have a client that wants to make an alteration to a garage, for instance, they may not be able to if the garage is non-conforming. So say they want to add, say, a carport. That may cause an issue because you'd have to make an application to the city to get this carport added, but then they would want, potentially want the garage to be compliant, which means you're applying for a variance through the city or possibly appearing before an appeals board. This is something to take into account when working with buyers and sellers who have made additions to a non-conforming property but have yet to submit their RPR to the city. So they may have an RPR and it shows before they added this addition that everything's fine, but when you go and resubmit it to the city's going to come back and say, no, we need a variance. That's a potential. Sheds. So any shed smaller than 108 square feet, roughly 10 by 10, that are not attached to any services or attached to a structure do not require a permit. So these movable sheds may not even appear on an RPR. And if you're ordering one, you can actually request that the shed be excluded. However, if they do appear on the RPR, they are usually non-compliant because people tend to put these things right on the fence or right on the property line, so there's not enough of a setback. So they will always come back as this shed is non-compliant. Most purchasers will accept the shed as non-compliant and they'll accept it where it is. If you are acting for a seller though, you may want to make sure that's the case by inserting a clause that the buyer will accept a movable shed as is. If you are acting for a buyer and the other agent suggests that you, a clause like this, that your client's going to accept the shed as is, you will want to make sure that the shed does not require a permit. If it does, I would recommend you not include a clause to accept it as is. You may want to even consider a clause that the shed have a permit, even if it is non-compliant by virtue of its location. Fences. So for a fence, you only need a permit if it's higher than 6'1" in the back and 4 feet in the front. If it's less than that, you can simply build it, although I do recommend you make sure it's on the property line. So when it comes to an RPR, even if your neighbor built the fence, so you had nothing to do with it, didn't pay for it, didn't build it, didn't plan it, it still must be on the RPR. So if you have an older RPR, your neighbor builds a fence, and if the buyer wants an updated one, well, you're going to have to get it updated. If the fence encroaches on city land or your neighbor's land, even if they built it, the RPR may not be compliant and an encroachment agreement may be required. When it comes to decks, if the deck is less than 2 feet high and the property is not located on a corner, there's no permit required. But even if there's no permit required, the deck's still going to require, it's still going to have to be on the RPR, still going to have to show up. All that's going to happen is the city's just going to say it's fine without a permit. If for whatever reason you do need a permit, it's best to get started as soon as possible because there are a number of drawings and a number of bits of information that you have to provide to the city. And it's a lot easier to get that done before you move out than to go back multiple times after possession. And finally, the removal of structures. So if your client has a compliant RPR, but an item like a deck or a fence or even a garage has been removed, there is no need to update it. It stands to reason that if the RPR was compliant with that structure, so with that deck or with that garage, then it's definitely going to be compliant without it. So no need to get your client to spend the money to get an update if they tore down their garage, for instance. Excuse me. And that is pretty much the quick and dirty about RPRs. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or if do we have?
Yeah, so Damien, we do a lot of acreages within our office. So whether through Strathcona County or Parkland County or Tofield, what's kind of the major difference for an RPR once you're getting over a certain number of acres? Or just talk about the process there.
It's really the same. You know, you're going to get a surveyor, and it's going to cost more. That's about the only difference, because you're going to have to get someone out there. But the only real difference is you're going to be looking for the bylaws may be a little different in the county versus the City of Edmonton. But you're still going to have everything where it should be. And I've seen them where, you know, someone had a pond over a certain size that didn't comply with development regulations. So there might be, I guess, if we're looking for differences, there might be more structures or more issues that can come up. But at the end of the day, it's still going to have to show everything. It's still going to have to be sent to the county, excuse me, or the town, and it's still going to have to comply with bylaws.
Okay. Can you also provide some examples of terms that you would write, like how you would actually word the term for either a seller or a buyer accepting an title insurance in lieu of an RPR, or how to write in the correct holdback amount? Just generalized terms.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, my philosophy with any term in the contract is there's no need to use legal words. Just make it clear and simple as possible. So if you want to make sure that they're going to accept an RPR from 2018, July 17th, that's, you know, non-compliant, then write that. You know, for a seller, it's just perfectly fine to say buyer to accept title insurance in lieu of compliant RPR. That's kind of how I would word that. When it comes to holdbacks, there's a couple things that I would make sure of. Is one, like I said, when I mentioned earlier about the holdback amounts, we want to make sure it's going to cover whatever the thing is. So, I mean, for decks, it's usually $5,000, although these days, hell, it could be 15 grand with lumber. And you also, sometimes if you're an agent working for a buyer, you want to put a time frame in there, because if you don't have a time frame, it goes to what's reasonable. Well, I don't know what's reasonable. It could be 6 months, it could be a year. So, for instance, if you're acting for a buyer, seller needs to get a compliant RPR because they got the no deck permit, for instance, you want to say we're going to hold back, say $5,000 if the process isn't complete by, you know, 6 months time, say, or whatever time of year it is, because it may depend for certain things, would be seasonal. So the clause would be seller to provide current compliant RPR no later than you know, September 15th, 2021. If not, holdbacks released to the buyer. So that's the sort of thing you may want to consider. I usually tell people to try and be, I know fair is maybe not the right word, but you want to be reasonable to both sides. So you don't want to ask for them to get a permit from the city in a month. That's not going to happen. And I don't think anyone would ever agree to that. But certainly I would think, say, a 6 month time frame is fair.
Do you also recommend when accepting title insurance instead of an RPR to cross out the title insurance or the RPR portion on the contract?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. I don't think it's going to matter one way or the other. But again, in the interest of clarity, there is absolutely nothing wrong with crossing that out.
Okay, then you just want to make sure that you're only crossing out the RPR portion.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're acting for the seller, and they're willing to accept that you crossed out all these other things about, you know, there are reps and warranties about all the structures being, you know, in line with bylaws and being fit for use and stuff. If the buyer's going to accept it without those clauses, then great. You know, they're pretty much accepting it as is, where is, when it comes to that stuff. But certainly, I think it's section 10.2, I believe. It's in section 10 for the RPRs. I just cross that out and move forward.
Okay. Does title insurance cover off septic tanks or anything like that on a acreage?
That one you got me, Alex. I do not know that, but I will look into it.
Okay. Do you have your contact info on the next slide, or is this your last slide?
I think I do have it. There you go.
Perfect. All right. So everyone, this is the best way of getting a hold of Damien. Damien has also volunteered his time to help people within the office if they have questions, just to reach out and just ask them a quick email or phone call just to say, hey, how would I word this, or what would this situation be, just to help you guys out. So use him both as your rep for your agent or your clients, as one of your 3 options, or just ask questions too and build your repertoire of knowledge. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. I wish I was on Facebook, but I'm not. Anyone watching, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat so that I'm able to ask. So we have a good number of people watching today.
The other thing, Alex, just to this presentation, I'm going to create a booklet along with a bit more information for your staff, and then what I'll most likely do is just drop a bunch off at your office for people to refer to if they like.
That'd be perfect. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm trying to think. Oh, never mind. One came in. It's, why does a deck on a corner require a permit?
You got me. What's worse is the actual, so this is the actual city wording here for a corner lot. A lot located at the intersection of 2 public roadways other than lanes, or a lot located abutting a public roadway other than a lane, which changes direction at any point where it abuts the lot. I have no idea, honestly. There's a lot of things with bylaws when it comes to the city that I'm completely, it baffles me as to why it would matter. But that's certainly something I can maybe do some digging into. It's just never, I've honestly never come across a deck on a corner lot that that had a permit issue.
I'm guessing it's because of a safety issue with people.
Yeah, it may be, like, that might be what, I mean, I'm not sure that would matter though. You know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of bylaws out there that, to me, I'm like, okay, I get what they're trying to do, but I'm not sure it actually provides any tangible benefit. But you know what, that's another thing I can look into, why, if it's possible to even track that information down.
All right, do we have any other questions? If you do have a question, and you're watching this later, whether it's on Facebook or through our Facebook group pages or on YouTube, I would recommend just reaching out to Damien directly and then asking him your question. I know Damien's always looking at making new realtor relationships as well, so can kind of connect and go from there. But anything else before we wish everyone a good morning? Damien?
Oh, for me, you're asking from anyone else. No, I think I'm good. Thanks for having me in, Alex. I really do appreciate it. And I am always, if anyone has any questions about pretty much anything related to a real estate deal, I have no problem calling people back and responding to messages as soon as I get them with some of these questions at any time of day.
Oh, we were kind of talking about it before. I'll just add this as a service. So Damien, if you have a condo buyer, part of Damien's process is he will actually then also help them review the condo docs. So you can have a one-stop shop. So you don't have to have them go to a condo doc review company. So you can actually just directly go one piece. So they're only dealing with one person, one piece of information. That is something that we were talking about before we went online or went live. So just wanted to share that because it wasn't in the process piece at the beginning. As well, Damien, you didn't tell them, I don't know if you're still doing it because of COVID, but will you meet people at their house?
I do, yeah. Yeah, it actually, well, with COVID, we have a couple of options, and really depends on what someone's comfortable with. So we can do a video call. If someone's not comfortable meeting in person, we do a video call. I still need the original. So what I'll generally do if I'm doing a video call with someone in the city, I will do the video call, have them put the documents in their mailbox, and then just come over and pick them up. If they're comfortable meeting at their house, either indoor or outdoor, I have no problem doing that. And really my philosophy is, I'll tell people, we'll get it done. We'll find a way. If we got to meet in Leduc at midnight, we're going to meet in Leduc at midnight.
And he's done it. So that's another benefit. So just because you see a downtown address does not mean you're dealing specifically with a downtown lawyer, which will also then help you if you're outside of the downtown Edmonton market. So thank you everyone for tuning in. It was great. Thank you, Damien, for all the wonderful information. And follow us on YouTube and like us on Facebook. See you guys.